My name's Jason. This is Jake and Martin. We're all from classmates.com. I've been here. I've been at Classmates for just about 3 years now, and so the beginning of our presentation is going to be all about the history of it, because it's wild and varied, and we have a history. We have a certain reputation in the city, and we need to talk about all of it, I guess. Jake and Martin have been here not as long as I have, but they've been both integral in the Ember CLI, and Node development that we have. So what I'm going to start with is actually showing you kind of where we started, where Classmates started, because it was in pretty dire need of a change. About 7 years ago, we developed something that we've called Canvas, not to be confused with the HTML5, I think the same name. Canvas for us was everything that was client-facing. It was the database. It was the Java, JSP, JSTL layer that happened to go together. It was everything there was that ever went onto the site in any facet, in any different language that we could ever think of. It was just there. So at first it was cool. Canvas was all right. And then it, like every other app ever, it turned into kind of legacy mode, and it bloated and it bloated and it bloated. And it got to the point where we couldn't maintain it anymore. So what we had was a 3-week sprint cycle. And you'll see the next bullet here says there's a 2-day release cycle. This is not to mean that we released every 2 days. It means it took us 2 days to release to prod. So I just want to make that clear. We have, with Canvas, this whole idea of web apps versus components, which as far as the Java world goes, mapping these dependencies, it's really kind of a nice system. You have components that drive web apps. Web apps are interdependent, and you can build out this huge structure that allows you to say, this is the chain, this is how it has to go. If this updates, that updates. It's great until you have 30 or 40 components, 7 or 8 apps, and the whole thing we had was managed by something called Apache Tiles, which again is a fantastic platform, but once it grows, there's no shrinking it. So there we had that. We had this 3-week sprint cycle culminating into a 2-day release. It's just a little graph, because I like a little bit of graph. On the left, you'll see this is the number of seconds it takes to build either component or app. The first one there, the tallest blue and red spires you have there, that's our primary component, the one that we called client tech. This is all of our jQuery. This is all of our client-facing script, CSS, the different bundles for mobile, and every other way we could break it out. It took about 10 seconds on average to build once you ran the Maven build cycle. Now, that was the first step of it. If you're running an app locally, you had to build the app after the component build. So now you've got another 20 to 25 seconds on top of that. And you better make your change right the first time, or else you've got to wait for it to go again. Now, this is just the build cycle. We're on Tomcat and Java, so if you redeploy the app, you have to stop Tomcat, redeploy it, and restart it, or else your machine can't handle it. So you take a good bathroom break when you make a change. It's kind of how that goes. You follow this down to the right. We started, call it 2 years ago, looking at Ember, looking at single-page applications, and that's where we started, running just about 5 seconds, looking at Ember with the manual handlebars compilation that we would have to kick off on our own, manual-less compilation. Now, I know manual's not the best word to use in the Ember community, but it was still a heck of a lot better than we were, so we were okay with it. 3, 4, 5 seconds, and page is ready to reload. And we looked at that and went, wow, this is fantastic. That's where we want to be. Then about 2 months ago, we started looking at Ember CLI, and we're going, okay, now we're measuring in milliseconds time to reload. So here we are from a 20-second build cycle down to a 1-second build cycle. I've got no bathroom breaks anymore. So we talked through the Java JSTL. This dependency tree that I talked about, we had one, Apache Tiles calls it a POM file, one POM to manage the entire system, and it was gigantic. We had one parent POM, and every app, it extended the parent POM, and either ignored some dependencies or added to the dependencies. And the mapping, it was, it took a full-time cartographer to even keep us on track, and it was not working out. And the developer blueprint, now this is, you start looking at headcount, you start looking at people who are actually doing the work. The longer we went with this, the harder it got to find someone to actually do the work. You had to know Java, you had to know JSP, JSTL, and the difference between the two. You had to be able to pick up Apache Tiles, you had to have the patience to do it, and then also be able to write JavaScript on top of the whole thing. So it kind of got to the point where we said this can be better for everybody involved. I mean, this is just a developer view of it. Take a minute and think about our network services group, what they had to go through, what our product owners and managers had to go through. They had to plan far enough ahead to get into a 3-week cycle to start to look at how much effort it would take to plan the 3-week cycle. So we were 6-7 months out from getting anything even close to production, even if we had a beta. So I'll let Jay talk a little more about the actual platforms we landed on, but we had a few keys to defining what a successful Classmates site would be. And I do preface it that way because we are part of a larger organization. If you've ever worked for any sort of corporate entity, you have to understand that it is an iceberg. It has to be an iceberg, and it has to move at such a slow pace because anything that has to make a change, it's got to go through legal, it's got to go through product, it's got to go up the chain, back down the chain. So all things considered, we move at a pretty quick pace for what is a corporate environment. Compares to a startup, something like Chris just showed us, we're going to look like we're just taking naps all day. But we move at a pretty fast pace for what we are, and we're actually okay with that. But for us, success was in the team size. We didn't need to have a framework team that was coupled by 4 to 5 feature teams just to get these things out the door. We wanted to have a smaller team. Seattle can handle adding in an extra couple dozen developers from Classmates. So we're down to 5 or 6 devs between FTE and consultants. Our goal for a new version of the site was that there's no negative customer impact. We haven't even begun to talk about improving the site. We're just moving it over to something that we can get past this 3-week, 2-day, 4-hour off time release cycle. So to even get there, let's port it over to something that's manageable and have no negative impact on the client. We have, I've got a map back here because we have teams here in Seattle. We have teams in the Tri-Cities, California, Hyderabad, India. So we're spread all over the place, and I need to make sure that the code that comes back from my devs from Hyderabad is going to support the code that's written here on my Seattle devs. If it's not, then we've got to rewrite it. And if ours doesn't work, they have to rewrite it just to keep everything going. So we need to make it steady, streamlined, straight, whatever it happens to be. The product velocity, that was a big one, of course. You start to drive a product as old as Classmates. We're 18 years old now. You can't stagnate at this point. We are still a social media site. It's not the right time to stagnate. It's not the right time to slow your product velocity. So it had to speed up. We had to give them back something, and speed was about the best thing we can give them. And the team dependency. So we have a front-end team now. We call ourselves front-end devs because it's primarily just the Ember and Bootstrap CSS development that we do now. Every once in a while we get into JSP because we still do have Tomcat in the mix, but it's not as painful as it was. But having only those couple people on one team is so much better than having framework to feature to framework to DB back to feature to get everything back out. So one team, no interdependency. And the biggest thing for us is that we want to take our code, our static JavaScript, CSS code, and kick it to prod. There's no reason we can't do that, no reason we shouldn't do that. But in our normal dependency-driven scenario, we have to build this thing and let the other teams rebuild their apps on top of it, make sure their stuff still works, and then go through this 2-day release cycle. So that last one is the biggest one for us, is that's the speed we pick up. That's the lightweight app that we pick up, and that's what's going to make it successful for us. And as a developer, it's nice to be able to say you can kick things out the door. We were locked on jQuery 1.4 for all these years. We looked at it about 2 years ago and said, what's it going to cost us to upgrade to jQuery 1.6? If you remember, jQuery 1.6 had some pretty significant changes. It would have taken us about 7 days to figure out where we had to make the changes. And then another 3 to 4 weeks on top of that, plus the QA, plus that whole release cycle I talked about. So most of Classmates is still on jQuery 1.4. Yeah, I see Ben laughing. Yeah, it's been there since Ben finally worked with us. So it's still there. Now on the Ember side, we're 1.8.1 now, going to 1.9 as soon as we can find the time just to change the dependencies. So knowing there's an upgrade path for me is kind of nice, because if you're stuck on any version of anything, there's no community left. You guys are up on CLI, you're up on Ember 1.8. You don't care if I'm pre-RC4. You don't want to talk to me anymore. You know, so we need to be on an upgrade path. We need to have a community. We need to have you guys there with us. And now we kind of have our heads out of that struggle. We can start to look at our product and go, hey, you know, it would be cool, and actually kick that back up the line instead of just taking the product ownership down. Do this, going about your business. We can start to push back up and say, this would be a great idea. I can add this. Give me a day, I can add this and make what you just suggested that much better. So that's how we got to the point where let's find ourselves a nice single page application. When we first started, we were fresh off a couple Backbone applications, and Backbone was good for the small apps that we built. So we took it and Ember and Angular, and we put them all kind of head to head and spent about a month and built small single page apps that would deliver, for us, our bread and butter is kind of the guest book visits. If somebody has seen your profile, go look at their profile and somebody else's, and this is what spins our product for us. And so we kind of built a lightweight version of that app in Backbone, in Angular, and in Ember. Backbone is just out of the box not big enough to do what we wanted it to do. If you can build Backbone up to be as big as you want it to be, and it will do anything you want it to do, but that's not what we were after. I just don't like Angular. That's all it came down to there. I didn't like anything else. We are actually limited a little bit. The way our release goes, we actually do have a code cleansing, a code check before everything goes out. And that's part of our normal Tomcat app and component release. And it would not accept the Angular properties on the DOM elements. It actually won't even accept the Ember handlebars script tags. So we can't have the inline template. So everything is planned to be a remote template anyway, so it kind of worked out, but we were a little bit hamstrung by what we could write. So what it came down to was Ember was the only choice we had, and this was all, we'll call it a while ago, as far as Ember goes. So it was a pretty big bet for us to kind of put all of our effort into developing an Ember app and to continue developing Ember apps. So I would like to say thanks to the community for sticking with it. If it hadn't grown, then I would have wasted months and months of time and had to go with something else anyway. So anyway, now that we're there, we dropped a 960 grid. It didn't fit mobile anymore. We picked up Bootstrap. If you've done any Bootstrap and Ember work, you know it's a bit of a struggle to make it work. The 1.8 release has made it easy, but before this, it took some effort, but we stuck with it. This Canvas bit I told you about, that monolithic framework, literally terabytes worth of code, we've dropped it down to Ember now. That's the only framework we have to worry about for any of our development effort. And Maven, again, which does a great number of fantastic things, we've dropped that, and we're actually using a combination of Bamboo and Gradle to do all of our compilations. This manages everything for us, from building the Ember apps and now CLI apps into place, deploying RPMs into the right places, and keeping up with our version scheming. So it's a pretty big shift for us and pretty lightweight, and so it's a huge difference from where we were. So now let somebody else talk for a while.
Okay. So I came in back in January as a consultant, and I think originally when they built it, it was back, they started in April of 2012, 2013? 2013. And I'm not actually sure if it was 08. It was a very old version, pre the new router changes. And so when I came in, there was a lot of things that were a little odd for me, because I'd been building stuff with the Ember App Kit, and just kind of getting used to that. They had started with Ember data from the beginning, and upgrading that. We've currently, actually, I think for our new app, we're on 11 with 1.8. And then they had built a custom adapter that basically used WebSockets to do the communication. Let's see. There were a lot of caching issues. We've had to kind of roll our own cache busting strategy. And then just lots of issues kind of trying to grow with Ember. As we've built new products since probably about March, we've kind of re-looked at the way we were approaching some of the other things and refactored, but we're taking those and kind of trying to build without making those mistakes again with CLI. So yeah, Jason kind of mentioned our stack. We've got Apache and Tomcat. We really don't actually have to touch Tomcat at all. We're generally in Ember all day, and we build. And because we're using require, we don't have to actually build. We just save, and it's there for our local environments, and then we can build and deploy. Our Node.js is what we use for basically our API. It's essentially a middleman to the Java API that the Java framework team has built for us. So yeah, require for the module management. We kind of have, it's organized by app. So we've got a core sort of folder that has all the stuff that's common between all the different apps, and then each app has its own folder with controller, router, template folders, all those. Let's see. So there was a lot of features that had to be built into it. These were kind of built before I came, but there's lots of ads, unfortunately, and those have to be loaded in via iframes.
Yeah, so Classmates has always had a certain amount of ad revenue. I think a lot of big sites do. Ours is actually internally managed. So we have a lot of ads that we do our own systematic weighting. And so depending on where you've been, how often you've been to our site, that kind of thing, the quality of your ads may shift. So burying our ads in within iframes that are nested within iframes, it kind of prevents anything from happening to our global window and keeps it in the iframes window. So it kind of keeps us a little bit safer from the blow up ads and the ones that are actually the ads that you just don't want to have. They're doing any sort of spoofing, any sort of reading of the DOM or anything like that of your parent page. So yeah, everything that was our ad support, it's a single request, and it feeds a bunch of iframes. It's necessary, but it doesn't have to be that pervasive. So we kind of blocked it a little bit.
And then we've got lottery A/B testing that they wanted to have. We had an original setup that we scrapped, and then we actually built something that's node-based. So for a request, you'd basically have a model that would actually request this lottery, and the lottery would determine which essentially model to return, and that would essentially drive which page you got. We develop actually a lot of stuff behind feature flags. So we will have actually bits of code that's actually live, but won't be turned on unless the feature flag's set. Gives us a little more control and lets us test stuff on prod. And then we've also got a custom CMS that we have to support called FlexPub. And it basically, we define positions and inject the FlexPub content into it. Node. So when I came in, actually, I did not spend a lot of time in Ember. I spent most of my time refactoring their Node layer. So they basically have this Node layer that does all the communication with the Java API and will make 5 or 6 requests and consolidate them into one request, so your client isn't making 50 requests. So they started using Socket.io, then Sock.js. And when I came in, I actually was tasked with refactoring with Engine.io in hopes to fix some of the issues we were having. We ended up with Express.js, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And as I said, one call for many data points. And the other thing that the node handles is basically does our authentication. So we have a authentication service. We pass a cookie up to the request. It makes a request against our Java API and validates the session. And then what they had before is it was basically keeping a client. So for every client, it managed a session that was a counterpart for that client. So the client had to get back to that same server. We had 7 servers, I think, at the beginning. And so we had a lot of issues with stickiness of the servers. It would go to the wrong server and totally screw up their session. And we're also using RSVP to manage all of our async calls. So that's actually been really nice. We can basically, do a RSVP hash of 5 or 6 calls and can build our result and send it back to the client. So yeah, initially it started with Socket.io, and honestly, Socket.io sockets are great. It's just for our clientele, we have a lot of people on older browsers and browsers that have issues with sockets, and they were using Ajax and, I'm sorry, not Ajax. Huh?
You say AOL?
No. Yeah, I'm long polling. Thank you. Completely. Yeah, I've tried to forget it. I lost a few months on that. So
just a funny note about that. Has anybody used or tried to use WebSockets with Ember or Node or some combination? They work beautifully, except for public spaces, and that's the part that was actually killing us. Is that the bulk of our community out on their cell phones. People going through AOL, people going through some types of Comcast, CenturyLink. If you're at a Starbucks, wherever it is, the number of ports that are open was actually our limiting factor. Is that we couldn't get on a good WebSocket port. We ended up usurping 80, which means that Apache had to go to a different port number, which worked out for a while. But even that, some browsers are actually smart enough now to know if you are doing port switching on any part of the traffic. And so we were just losing connections left and right. So that's why Jake rewrote Node 3 times and got us onto Express. So we don't use WebSockets anymore at all. Not to say you shouldn't, but
yeah,
you shouldn't.
It's very fast. It's very lightweight. I mean, it doesn't have headers. It's once you've got your session, it's just sending it back and forth. But and I had the hopes that we'd be able to do some real-time stuff with it. Like I was actually excited when I started on refactoring it, but I kind of grew weary of that. So we also had a pretty nice resilient reconnection mechanism. So I mean, if the client lost connection, it would retry like 6 times, and eventually you wouldn't get stuck. It was actually pretty nice. But yeah, we had a lot of issues. Load balancers, we had a lot of issues with configuring the load balancers, and we didn't have any control over that. So eventually we kind of got it figured out, but at that point we needed to move on. And yeah, it just, we had some issues with our custom adapter from time to time, and changing from all these different libraries, it really didn't give us as much improvement as we wanted. So we rewrote it as Express, as an Express server. So when I did the refactor with Engine.io, we took all of those requests. We basically have this method that goes and hits our Java API with a promise. And so it just makes a regular, uses Node's HTTP request, and the callback basically returns and resolves the promise or rejects depending on what comes back. Because of this, we can essentially chain a bunch of these together or do a hash or whatnot. it worked out really well. But when we ported over to Express, I was able to just take those resources and drop them in as endpoints. So we basically, the refactor actually only took like a week, which I wasn't expecting. So we switched over to the REST adapter. We had to come up with a different auth scheme because our Java API is actually using memcached. It wasn't very expensive to just make the request every time, because once they made it, it was there. So we ended up just making it so it requests auth every single request. This allowed us to do some side loading of records, and because of that, the way that they were written, we can basically use those resources and take those results and side load along with our request. So, just since EmberConf, I'd been pushing pretty hard to get us onto CLI, and finally got my way this September. So we started building our first app and also building up a framework with CLI in mid-September. We're just about done and probably going to launch next week or this week, hopefully, after some testing. So yeah, we're, after we've built this platform framework, we're essentially now going to be trying to port all of our existing stuff over that we've built in Ember, but we're also going to be building new products that will essentially be counterparts to the canvas. So eventually this will all be on CLI, and we'll be able to have it link in Ember with link to and whatnot. We have to actually use a lot of hard links because a lot of the places they're outside of the Ember app. So the user has to constantly reload the Ember app, unfortunately. The CLI setup is a little better for that. It's loads really fast, which is pretty nice. So, and then yeah, upgrading has been really nice. We've been able to upgrade to, we're up on 1.8 now, as of yesterday or this morning actually, and the upgrade path just is a lot easier. It's having upgraded from 1.1 to 1.6 on the previous app, it's gone much smoother. And then, yeah, we're actually hoping to, I wanted to be on pods earlier, but we're probably going to be doing it maybe next week or something. But we want to get our structure using pods so we can take advantage of the lazy loading of routes when it hits. Yeah, that's about it. So one of the big things, we're really trying to build this, trying to learn from our mistakes. And there's a lot of stuff that's come about. When this was originally built, there's been so many things added, and components came about early on when it was being built, but they didn't really use them. Initializers. So one of the things that we're doing is we're injecting our current user into the app in Tomcat, preloading it and just injecting it using Ember Data's inject and then find by ID, which actually doesn't make a request. It does a it looks it up in the store. If it's there, it'll return it. It returns a record array, so it's synchronous, and so it won't block. So you don't have to do the defer app or anything like that. So the other thing, we're trying to use services as much as possible. So our ads, we basically had this weird setup where we had to identify all these locations, but what we're doing now is we essentially have a component that if it's there, it's an ad, and it registers itself with a service, and the service then says, okay, these are all the ads on the page, requests, and then sends back, and the service gets the content to each ad that requested. So just some nice things, and then using Ember Data a little more intelligently. We're using filters, and instead of just Ember find on every route, we're actually loading the data and then taking a little more control over it. It's been kind of nice. So, and Martin. Or Jason?
Yeah, sorry. So we actually have two things we wanted to show you. Both of them are on the CLI apps. bear with me for a minute. We have this is stuff that has not made it to prod or anything like that. So if it matters to you, you're going to see kind of a preview of what we're going to release here soon. So we've got a little code going out. We have a little bit of CLI. You can see it's already. This is just the stuff that Jake was talking about. We started in September. So even that fast, we've picked up a number of different routes in their component templates. One of the things I wanted to show you before Martin got in, I wanted you to see the comparison between the two CLI apps that we're working on. Once we started to get into the CLI mindset, this is faster, this is more lightweight, this is quicker to build, quicker to deploy. We just started refactoring left and right. Every little bit of efficiency we could find, we put it in. So one of the things I wanted to show, something that Jake and I came up with a little while ago, was the idea of having layouts and formats for our site. If you haven't thought about how your site's template and structure works together yet, you ought to consider how much ancestry you can bake into Ember just by the way the views and components work. We have essentially one primary site layout. It's pretty big, as you can see. Across the site, we have a header and a footer. Those are consistent no matter what. And then within that, we're going to have a couple different options. Right now, the apps that we've built, we only have two columns, one primary content column and one that we call the merchandising column. This is going to be bolstered into a single column, a 3-column, a 2-column, right? There's a number of different layouts, different formats within our layouts. And so what we ended up doing was this little bit of the site layout. This is requested by the application view. So this is set up as a layout name. I can type it, I promise. And so everything that is application and down, we pick up the site layout, and that just gets inherited, and we don't have to worry about it from then on. And then as we come into our routes, assuming the structure, of course, will change with pods. Right now, we only have two major apps going on in here. One is our inbox that Martin's going to show you, and one is our email subscription maintenance page that I'm going to show you. These we can consider two primary branches of our routing structure. Our account pages have a master view, and our messages has a master view. And each one of them go through and they say, my layout is this. And there's a chance there to override that 2-column layout, to inherit from that 2-column layout, to modify it as it gets into the view. And so as we get down our view chain, we have complete control over what actually gets rendered in an inheritance structure. So I know Chris had said that you guys weren't using many views. In this instance, this is how we found them to be extremely powerful for our site. And so what we ended up with, and this is the account email subscriptions page. I had one designer that is not with us anymore. God rest his soul, he worked somewhere else. Actually got on board with Bootstrap and Ember both. And before he left, he designed this email subscriptions page for us. And this is entirely Bootstrap on top of Ember. And it's just a simple way for you as a user to manage which emails you receive or don't receive. And so just a quick tour of the page and the views I just talked about. This orange bar and the footer down at the bottom is universal. That comes from the application view. This is the layout that was set before. This is actually the 2-column format. The right-hand column, the merchandising column, is empty right now. I don't like to have ads running locally, believe it or not. So so what we have is just the primary content, and now we're making use of everything from nested components. This is our primary route delivers the current user model for us. Let's see if I had that. Oh, I lost it. Nerds. There it is. So we're delivering a set of side-loaded data back down. This is one of the express endpoints that Jake was telling you about. It's got our current user, any user model associated with it. In this case, it's got photos. This is a different route for us, but this is an example of what our side-loaded data response would look like. that primary current user feeds everything but this events list. And this is where we started to do component injection for this. And so the component itself goes out and gets its own data, manages its own view and state and everything else. So this is one of our CLI apps, and then I'm going to let Martin show you just a quick tour of our inbox as well. I think Ben should enjoy this, and this is one of the big applications back in the day. Go ahead.
Hi everybody, I'm Martin. I joined the team about 7 months ago, and I'm really glad I missed most of what they talked about, because the struggle is real when you're transferring something legacy to up-to-date technology. It's so many problems you could have never foreseen, honestly. And I'm really glad they have dealt with most of that, so I could focus on new stuff and features. And so the last month we've been making this inbox, and I want to talk more about not so much what this is, but a certain mindset when you're creating, components for the web or UI. The thing is, everybody that's a web developer done it for 10 years or something, how much work is repetitive. You're doing a set of tasks which between all your apps are about the same, requesting your data, all your stuff, so much just crossover, yet traditionally we've been redoing it every time. And that's a giant waste of time. So that's something I picked up as a .NET developer at first. I didn't do that by choice, but now I'm out of .NET. But one thing I really liked is how they abstract the common needs that you would have as a developer. And then you can just reuse widgets, components, or techniques that you've already solved as a problem. So I find Ember to be probably the best tool that I know of. And when it comes to abstracting things and making them reusable. So it's really easy to make something which is actually very dry, thanks to the hierarchies and modular nature of it, so that you can inherit things. And so here, for example, we have this inbox, and it's kind of a standard social network or whatever kind of inbox. You have your received messages, sent messages, and your notifications about whatever happened. And this is bogus data in a work in progress, but you get the picture. So the thing about that is you really are requesting the exact same type of data. That the model is always message. In every case, it's a message. So when you put all that in the cache, you either have to, every time you change route, so here now is inbox, then you have send, you either have to re-request everything and flush the cache and then get more stuff, or you have to make a way to manage your models so that each route only gets a portion of the models accordingly, So basically what we ended up doing to solve that problem, we didn't want to be able to have to refresh every time, If somebody has, oh, actually, Jason, this user has no pages, which is, I want to, so I need to log it out.
Jane Cobb's not a very popular guy.
Let's see. This guy, I think, has pages.
Yeah, he does.
And we're demoing local or QA? So here's a user that has, for example, right here, 137 of this kind. And then when you go to send messages, there are a bunch more, 9 more pages right here. So you're talking about such a volume of data. Who knows, in the future, it might get to thousands. So you really don't want, for the sake of user experience, to have to reload that data every single time. That overloads your server and the client's browser and things like that. So we ended up making a solution. Jake had the idea of using a filter. So if you've done much work with Ember, when you're normally requesting data, you just say this.store.find, but that would make an AJAX call every single time when you're looking for a listing, because the client has no way of knowing if the server is going to provide the same data set. So how do you solve that problem, right? And we ended up using the filter. So I need to find my way to WebStorm here. The route. So okay, so here's the inbox route, for example. And if you look at this, the text, yeah, Command plus.
Yeah. Is that good enough with the Zoom?
Right. So here you see this is a route, and you're not seeing any of the normal hooks. So what we ended up doing is we made this filter route mixin, and that's where really the magic is. And in here, we're just preparing certain pieces of data which tell the mixin what to do. And in this case, it will get a model, which is a message, and it will query for a certain type of message which belongs in the inbox. And then it will filter once it has received it. And in the inbox route, it will only show the personal and the shared messages, and only the ones that belong to the current user. So that's how it will make sense out of that, because you have 3 tabs with the same type of data type. So then if you look at that mixin, that is the filtered route mixin. Again, just zoom in. There. So that's where the real hooks are, actually. And so you see here how the model hook is going to use those 3 pieces that go in the actual route. And then it will run the setup model hook, and then it will hand them off to the controller, but it will have filtered for the correct parameters. So each of our routes, the inbox or the send tab or the notifications, they all do something similar. They're all basically set up so they can run this mixin.
But you're dealing with a record array instead of a promise. So basically, this allows us to just, you're getting it back instantly, generally, unless it actually needs to request the data.
Right. So as you can see, the send route looks almost identical to the inbox route. It's just simply passing different parameters to the mixin. And the outcome of that is that once you're here, each of these things are really dry. When you're making them, you don't repeat any code, really. And once you've requested initially, you can now change tabs without any kind of delays. You don't re-request the data. You don't have to deal with that. Additionally, we made the pagination component, which kind of ties into this whole setup. So here you can see that we can also change pages without re-requesting anything, and it's totally seamless, which I think is pretty important for user experience to not have that kind of choppy delay every single time you're changing routes. And the pagination was done basically piggybacking on this, but then I went to the guides where the author of the query params in Ember, I think he's Mahdi or whatever his name is, Alex. So he wrote this way to do pagination with basically a query parameter. So that would be, so I copied a lot of his code and then I altered it a bit, and I created this thing called paginated controller. And you can see here it makes use of query params. It calculates the number of pages based on the model length. And then it has this paged array, which essentially ends up being what you're iterating over in your inbox template. Rather than iterating over the models that are in the route, you're creating a property which is already paged and set up for pagination, so that you don't have to deal with a whole bunch of stuff in the route. Your controller can handle all the chopping up of the model. The model exists, 90 of them exist in the route, yet you're presenting them in portions thanks to the controller inheriting this mixin. And this is, again, abstracted this way, so that when you actually want to use this filtered and paginated route, all you have to do is you inject 2 mixins, and then in your template, let's see here, messages. So in the template here, you see there's this pagination widget, and these properties which are being passed to the component are made in that paginated controller mixin. So as long as you tie those 2 pieces of data, so the component basically does a handshake with mixin for the controller, all that it takes to make this into a pagination widget is this much. So as long as you inherit the mixin and you declare this, you end up with a pagination widget anywhere you want. So this much alone allows you to do that. So that's the lesson here, from my point of view, is that you have a certain problem. You want to load your data. You don't want to have to reload your data every time you make a change in route or page. And you can abstract with Ember to the level where it is so clean, it takes you 2 lines of code to add it anywhere you can. And the best thing about the Ember CLI, which I think is that now that we've abstracted this, all it would take is to make it into an add-on, and anybody else in the world can use it within 5 minutes of installation, and just copying this much code right here would make your route paginated. It would be this much. So I really, I talked last time at the hack session, I saw somebody demoing something pretty cool, which was similar problem. They wanted their infinite scroll to continue loading data instead of preloading it. Because let's say you have 5,000 records. If you load that in advance, it will take you, I don't know, whatever, 10 seconds, 20 seconds or more. But if you can do it in 50 by 50 and it goes smoothly, that is a much nicer user experience. So the guys had solved it. And I was like, great, so can I use it? They're like, oh, it's really tied to our app. It's also kind of proprietary. It's this and that. So the lesson is we have to recreate that if you want it. But the whole point to me behind the framework like Ember is that we're all making this together. And if you and I and everybody else abstract your code and publish as an add-on, then a solved problem doesn't have to be reinvented every single time. Whoever solves a problem well can push that out, and then everybody can inherit that, so that we spend our time on solving another problem and contributing that to the ecosystem. So that to me is the most powerful thing about open source framework like Ember versus .NET, which was a closed system at the time I was using it, and you were on your own, and that's the whole game changer to me, that you can abstract things and share with the community in a very, very easy way. So if you want this widget, now that I've talked about it, we got to publish it. Yeah, we got to publish it, and you can do your pagination and filtering just within an installation and 2 lines of code. And that really sums it up as far as what I have to say.
That'll do.
Any questions?
Thanks, heaps. Do you want? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to? Can you just go to addons.gowithember.io, please? Yeah. Has anybody seen the site? .io.
Oh, sorry.
There is someone. Is it?